I am once again struck with the desire to talk about something other than Sonic. It will happen again. After years of legal limbo, Jason Voorhees has returned, even if it is in an Angry Orchard commercial and with a bigger head than usual. And whenever a horror franchise is revived, there's usually some rumblings of a crossover. You could say this is because they've been trying to get these creepy killers to meet since the 80s, but we've been making our monsters mash since at least 1943. While a majority of these pitches never come to pass, Freddy vs. Jason is one of the great successes. And with the Hockey Masked Killer's latest franchise entry, introducing a new seemingly supernatural killer with Eve, I think most people just really like the idea of Jason squaring up with another killer. But my regular viewers know my favorite medium is comics, which has given Jason a fair amount of crossovers, and I thought it's my duty to cover them. I do need to set some rules first, however. Jason is one of the most recognizable characters in pop culture, spawning tons of parodies, rip-offs, and random background appearances. So I'm not digging through every issue of Mad Magazine he showed up in. I'm only going to be covering non-parody appearances that refer to Jason by name. Oh, and before we move forward, these are slasher comics. So naturally, a good portion of these feature gore and nudity. I won't be showing any of that. I prefer to stay monetized, but that's your warning if you decide to read any of these. With that out of the way, let's start with I've already gone over Topps Comics' most notable addition to the extended Friday canon, Jason vs. Leatherface, in its own video. Go check that one out. Jason vs. Leatherface is one of my favorite comics ever. When you look at what Topps did with Jason, though, everything is tied to a crossover of some kind. One of the first things Topps did with the Friday the 13th license was to do a 3-issue adaptation of Jason Goes to Hell. Sort of a baffling decision to do such a straight adaptation, dropping the first issue a month before the film came out, when a vast majority of the trailers and TV spots really obscured the fact that Jason isn't physically present for the majority of the movie, with a lot of clips from the beginning and end of the film utilizing a lot of quick cuts. I don't think the trailers were outright dishonest, just more wanting to obscure that element of the film. However, it's laid bare in the comic, being that of this adaptation's 84 pages, Jason is physically present on 12 of them. Like the movie, he does make additional non-physical appearances in Reflections, but the time we spend with him is still pretty limited. However, one of the main interesting things about Jason Goes to Hell is that it's the beginning of the series' connections with other horror properties. In addition to the obvious one, the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead series and The Crate from the Stephen King short story, The Crate, are both in the Voorhees house. While nothing was ever planned for the latter, though I'm sure Stephen King has a few ideas, the Necronomicon and wider Evil Dead lore was at least conceptualized to be pretty important to Jason's backstory. The comic, however, removes the majority of this. It keeps the obvious one, but cuts the Evil Dead and Stephen King connection. There is a panel that could have featured the Necronomicon, but maybe because Dark Horse had recently done an Army of Darkness comic, they didn't want to risk including it. There is one more crossover, and this one requires a little bit of context. A year prior to his passing in 1994, comic book legend Jack Kirby would license a selection of his unrealized pitches to Topps, which resulted in a group of comics referred to as the Secret City Saga, and is also sometimes referred to as the Kirbyverse. One of these books was Satan 6, a concept developed by Kirby in the 70s, focusing on a task force put together by the devil. 5 members of the group are individuals who sold their souls for deals that were so terrible, heaven appealed their contract, trapping them in limbo. In order to escape limbo, the 5 are recruited by the devil to recruit more souls. Kinda like a multi-level marketing scheme, though the group is shown to be pretty incompetent. The 6th member of this group is Frightful, the demon tasked with babysitting them. From everything about me, I feel like I should love this comic, but every page is so busy I struggle a bit with it. There's not a whole lot of space for my eyes to rest. Despite Jack Kirby's name being used in relation to this comic, he only ever directly contributed to the first issue, and even then only a portion of it. The 4th issue of the series is a crossover with Friday the 13th, and is the only time you'll find the names Jack Kirby and Jason Voorhees in the same place. This issue sees the Devil, tired of the team's inefficiency, telling Frightful he's going to replace him, summoning Hell's newest resident, Jason Voorhees. However, Pamela's baby boy doesn't work well with others, even if it is the Devil, and the hockey-masked killer immediately tries to decapitate the Prince of Darkness. The six leap into action, only for Jason to dog-walk them. The Devil sends Jason away, and before he can name-drop the film, the book's presenter, a guardian angel named Pristine, apologizes for delaying the issue's real story until page 6.
A crummy commercial?
So yes, of the book's 28 pages, Jason is on 4 of them. The meaning of the phrase guest starring is being stretched to its absolute limit. I actually have a physical copy of this issue. It's a neat piece of comic history, even if the cover wasn't totally honest. Freddy vs. Jason is the highest grossing film of both the Friday the 13th franchise and the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. So a sequel was inevitable. In fact, they were already planning a sequel before it was released.
There's gonna be a sequel.
Oh yeah.
According to an internal memo, while villains like Michael, Pinhead, Leprechaun, Chucky, and the Tall Man had all been considered to be added to a sequel, it was decided that Ash from the Evil Dead Army of Darkness franchise would be the best pick, both because the Necronomicon already tied the franchises together, and for the sheer marketability of Bruce Campbell. A 17-page treatment was written by Jeff Katz, but the film never happened. And there's a lot of different stories as to why, but we're not talking about that today. What we are talking about, however, is that in 2007, Wildstorm, the DC imprint that then held the comic rights to Freddy and Jason, and Dynamite Entertainment, who still holds the comic rights to Army of Darkness to this day, teamed up to produce a 6-issue adaptation of this treatment, with the adaptation being written by comic scribe James Kahoric. There's an additional credit for Rick Burchett, who is listed as storyteller, which is different from Jeff Katz's story credit somehow. I'm not sure what this means. The story actually sticks pretty close to Katz's treatment. To briefly summarize, 5 years after the events of Freddy vs. Jason and set around Christmas, which I think is fun, Freddy has been trapped in Jason's mind since his defeat at the hands of the hockey mask slasher. Having finally found a way to escape with the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead, Freddy manipulates Jason once more, this time to obtain the book for him. Unbeknownst to either of them, Ash Williams, part-time Chosen One, full-time retail employee, has just been transferred to the Crystal Lake branch of S-Mart. After coming across some of Jason's handiwork and getting info dumped his backstory, Ash figures the Necronomicon is involved in some way and investigates the Voorhees house while also teaming with our final girl, Carolyn. This of course leads all 3 characters to eventually collide, with Freddy and Jason unable to coexist. The comic ends with Freddy being sucked into a portal, Jason frozen but still alive, or whatever he is, at the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake along with the Necronomicon, with Ash and Carolyn driving off into the sunset together. There's a few small changes, but there's one that I think is a little detrimental to the story. At this point, Jason's been manipulated with the memory of his mother a good few times, most recently by Freddy, but honestly this started all the way back in part 2. In the original treatment, Freddy tries this trick once again during the final battle, but Jason finally sees through it. While they probably cut this for time, I think it deprives Jason of a real character moment. It may sound weird if you're not into this franchise, but Jason's usually played with a lot of personality. Jason just feels like he has less character in this book than usual. There are 2 moments, a sassy finger wag and him copying Ash's chainsaw hand with his machete, that give him a little bit, but feel more like gags, and don't help him feel like the fully realized character I know he can be. There's another change I want to talk about, but we'll cover that a little later. The art is provided by Jason Craig with Thomas Mason on colors. For the most part, I think it's pretty good, and even gives us one set of panels I consider pretty iconic. But in the 6th issue, the quality takes a bit of a nosedive. It feels messier. The action that was previously really easy to follow feels very disjointed here. Faces seem to be a struggle, the colors are weird. I don't know if they were rushing to meet a deadline or what, but the art just feels worse in this issue. Despite my gripes, I actually like this one a fair bit, and while I'm sad we'll never see a movie version of this, I'm glad we got to see it in some form. The miniseries did well enough that they actually produced a follow-up, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, The Nightmare Warriors. I think this one is bad. Yeah, it sort of pains me to say that, but it's what I feel. To briefly summarize this one's story, after the events of the first series, the US government takes the Necronomicon from Camp Crystal Lake, while also unintentionally unleashing Jason Voorhees. The government plans to use the book as a weapon, but Freddy plans to use this as an opportunity to take over the world, and once again manipulates Jason. Meanwhile, Ash teams up with survivors from both the Friday and Nightmare franchises, with the ultimate battle taking place in DC. Almost the exact same team returns for this, though Rick Burchett seems to not be involved, and the new colorist is Gabe Altabe. So the question arises, if mostly the same people were working on it, how did it get noticeably worse? Well, the first problem comes in that the outline by Jeff Katz was set to be a 12-issue event. However, the story would be reduced to 6 issues. And rather than pitching a new story, James Kahurik was tasked with condensing the existing pitch, with Jeff Katz saying they didn't lose any major stuff. Adapting a film or a film pitch to a 6-issue miniseries came out pretty well. And hey, Jason Goes to Hell got a comic adaptation that was only 3 issues long that covered all the relevant moments. So the first Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash really had the deck stacked in its favor. Cutting 12 issues to 6 issues is much harder. The trade paperback of this book is 144 pages, meaning at minimum, there's over 100 pages of stuff missing from this story. While Katz said they kept all the important plot beats, something else important has been lost, and that's pacing. We very quickly go from the survivors of Freddy and Jason's previous outings teaming with Ash to Freddy Krueger has taken the White House! Without these events being properly paced and with no coherent sense of escalation, everything feels like it just sorta happens. It's silly and you might enjoy it on your first read through, but there's nothing narratively satisfying about it. The scale of the story I also think is too big. I just don't think Freddy and Jason work in such an explicit world domination context. Freddy I can see looking to obtain an ultimate power, but Jason, not so much. Jason sort of ends up feeling superfluous to this story. He ends up just doing grunt work for Freddy, with no big moment where the two turn on one another. They scuffle a little bit in the 5th issue, but when our heroes show up, they're basically on the same side again. The overall story could work with just Freddy and Ash, and you could replace Jason with just about anybody, which isn't a great thing to say about one of the title characters. It's not hard to imagine a version of this story without Jason's supporting cast, because they don't play a role in defeating Freddy, just Jason. It's like an entirely separate, disconnected finale is happening in parallel to the actually important one. I did mention they brought back some of the survivors from previous films to be the supporting cast, and I don't think they're handled all that well either. They kill off Carolyn from the previous comic immediately. I get Ash is supposed to be miserable, that's his character, but I don't feel we really got a grasp on these two's relationship. Even in the truncated retelling in Evil Dead 2, we know the depth of Ash and Linda's relationship. Ash's grief so palpable that it frees him from the control of a demon. But we don't get to learn anything about Ash and Carolyn's relationship. Her death is only the justification for Ash to go on a revenge mission. She's only brought up 3 times afterwards, and it's mainly in the context of Ash wanting revenge. And it's not like there isn't time for Ash to have emotions. In the first series, he clearly mourns and blames himself for the deaths of 2 characters he basically just met. The comic also ends with Jason's great niece kissing Ash, so what? Some of the movie's survivors are killed off very abruptly. One turns evil without much buildup or good explanation, and also maybe dies very abruptly. One character was a baby when we saw them in a movie, and another wasn't born yet. These 2 are basically OCs at this point. Also, why would this be how you draw Tina and Rennie? I understand you can't make them look exactly like their actresses without obtaining likeness rights, but neither of them dressed like this. That brings me to the art. It's also bad. I can't believe it's done by the same person who did the first one. It's extremely inconsistent. Everyone practically transforms into a new human being in every panel. There's a few panels that are traced or heavily referenced movie screenshots. There were a few of those in the first one, but I didn't really mind because they didn't break the style. But they stand out a lot here because of how different the quality is. A good portion of these panels are one good tweet away from being memes. Creditorian does some art in issue 4, and it's better, but we still get some bad panels in this one. Let me talk about the ending real quick. Freddy is depowered with Ash landing the killing blow before his body is sent into the vortex, ending the Dream Master for good. This was the ending in Jeff Katz's outline for the first Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, as according to that internal memo, Robert Englund possibly wanted to end his tenure as Freddy Krueger, and it was thought that Ash would be the perfect one to end him for good, and it would still leave the door open to do a prequel movie. The comic changed it to be a more sequel-friendly ending and transplanted the original ending here. Overall, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash is pretty alright, Nightmare Warriors not so much. Again, I enjoyed that one on my first read, but I feel any enjoyment greatly diminishes every time I revisit it, as I become more aware of its flaws. One positive about both series, though, is the covers. The cover art is really fun to look at, and they definitely hit these out of the park. Jason's final officially licensed comic appearance was in the final issue of Nightmare Warriors, where despite his head being removed from his body, he mysteriously disappeared from the White House lawn. But that was just his last official comic appearance. This next one is fun. Hack Slash is a comic series that began in 2004, created by Tim Seeley and Stefano Caselli. The story follows Cassie Hack, the daughter of a supernatural killer known as the Lunch Lady. After returning her mother to the afterlife, Cassie, joined by her unnaturally strong partner Vlad, dedicates her life to hunting down and disposing of any slashers that come across her radar. The series has had tons of crossovers and tons of references to other franchises sprinkled throughout. On June 9th, 2010, a good few months after the end of the Nightmare Warriors, Hack Slash co-creator Tim Seeley, joined by writer Scott Alley and colorist Dave Stewart, produced an unofficial one-page crossover with not just Jason, but Dexter. Dexter, if you didn't know, is a TV series that began in 2006 based on a novel series by Jeff Lindsay about a serial killer, Dexter Morgan, who primarily targets murderers. Obviously a setup vaguely similar to Hack Slash, though more grounded in reality. Except for one book in the series, but that one is pretty much ignored. The one page shows Dexter, having heard about Jason, tracking down the hockey masked killer and attempting a normal method of disposal. This, of course, doesn't work because Jason is undead, and Dexter is knocked away. Almost immediately, Cassie and Vlad arrive, though it's unclear if they're coming for both of them or just Jason. While this is unofficial, it is also what introduced me to Hack Slash. And if anyone had been feeling particularly litigious, they could have easily been taken to court over this. Funnily, there is enough to make an argument that the Friday the 13th series and Hack Slash might share the same world. There's a couple appearances of characters who are implied to be Jason, or impli-Jasons if you will. I won't. The 2007 crossover with Chucky mentions Jason by name. In 2011, Hack Slash crossed over with the slasher film series Hatchet, which has a few direct and indirect connections between it and the Friday the 13th series. And in 2013, Cassie met Ash from the Evil Dead series. If you're a believer in the shared slasher universe theory, which is sort of a prerequisite for a lot of these crossovers, Hack Slash fits nicely inside it. I have no problem believing that Dexter vs. Jason vs. Hack Slash is a story that canonically happened that we just don't get to see. I imagine Dexter fans won't like it as much though. And that's pretty much the end of the Friday the 13th comic crossovers. But I can't imagine it's gonna stay that way. In addition to the upcoming TV series, they're already planning a new movie and video game. Just revive the old game, please. I can't imagine that new comics are that far behind, and we're in the middle of a whole bunch of crossovers right now. I was let down that Jason didn't show up in the Multiverses comic book adaptation, being that he's the whole reason I picked up that game at all. You could say this miniseries leans a little bit more towards younger readers with some of the character choices, but there is blood in it, a little bit of light cursing, and they did include Rick Sanchez while referencing his drunkenness. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy have seen Joker's murder victims.
Oh no!
Thinking they might include a guy in a mask with a machete isn't ridiculous, especially with how cartoony his Multiverses design is. I find it far stranger they included the Wicked Witch of the West, and she didn't even get to be added to the game before it shut down. As for where the comic license should go, I have a few ideas. I've been enjoying the new EC horror stuff coming out of Oni Press, like Epitaphs from the Abyss. There might be some writers writers circling that publisher that could have some interesting takes on Jason. Dynamite has had the Army of Darkness license for a very long time, and has had a few other horror licenses cycle in and out. Friday the 13th might be a good fit there. We'd at least get another Jason vs. Ash story out of it. Or maybe I'm stupid and something about the multiverses deal already landed Jason's comic rights at DC, and right before the TV show premieres, they'll announce something like Batman vs. Jason. I don't know, feels like anything could happen at this point. Thank you all so much for watching. A little different from my normal subject matter, but I like a whole lot of different things. A special thank you to my patrons, and a special shout out to my $5 patrons, NetRex, NateDM990, Diddly Do, and Queer Kaiju. See y'all in the next video.